Okay, fantastic. So, good evening, and really thank you for joining us. It is an absolutely fantastic, delightful honor to reach out in this way through this webinar platform, and I'm very, very excited about it. And I think that we're going to do great things with it. So, for the first talk, what I've decided to focus on, and the title of the talk is Lead Me. Now, before we get into the details of that talk, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself and my background. And so, let's see, we're trying to go forward with this, and so that you know a little bit about who I am and what I've been doing for the last couple of decades. So I started my career as a university lecturer, so as an assistant professor of psychology, and I was living and working in London till about 4 or 5 years ago as a psychology organizational behavior professor at the Richmond University. So when I moved back to the United Arab Emirates 4 years ago, I got more involved in learning and training and development. And right now, as Raghi pointed out, I am the Director of Learning and Development at Kawader. Every Saturday, I write for Khalij Times, and my column is called Out of Mind. And so if you're interested to read that, it's similar subjects of psychological and well-being topics that are covered every Saturday. I also write for the Huffington Post, so it's wonderful to have a much more global audience with some of the topics and the issues that we address. In 2010, I started a campaign called Bolt Down on Bullying in the UAE to try and eradicate or prevent or at least confront cases of bullying in our schools, and that's ongoing as well. Life Clubs is a weekly personal and professional development that we brought to the United Arab Emirates in 2013, so stay tuned. There'll be interesting things that we might be doing through this platform as well in Life Clubs. And it's a 2-hour weekly workshop that is open to the public for everyone, so it's really fun and engaging. I'm really honored to also be a featured author for the Emirates Airline Festival of Literature, 2 years running. And this year I will also be involved in terms of what they call Friends of the Festival, and with seminars and workshops that we'll set up. So that's my professional life, and as well as Raghi pointed out, we have a weekly radio program called Voices of Diversity on 103.8 Dubai Eye. So the professional life is very much about learning and development and all these different aspects that you've just seen. But on the other side, I also have my personal sort of gift here, whose name is Mr. Yusuf, and he's my 14-year-old son. And I think it's, for me to describe myself and to tell you about myself without mentioning him to you would be absolutely incomplete. But he's a wonderful reminder. Our children is a wonderful reminder of why we do the things we do and why we contribute to society, why we contribute to our own well-being and the well-being of our community. Because as you know, they're the future generation, and hopefully what we try and do is improve things that when we hand over the world to them when we're no longer here, that they're able to perhaps live in a better, improved society and communities. So that's a little bit about me. And if you have any questions, of course, about anything that I've mentioned, please do ask. So what's our purpose here today? What we want to do is kind of get hooked back into the reality of exploring the different aspects of our lives, to really plug ourselves back in rather than feel disconnected from the different dimensions of who we are and how we can try and better reach our potential. So we want to reflect and almost reboot, if I can take or borrow from a technological term. We want to reflect and reboot and sort of have a fresher perspective about some of the things and the activities that we're engaging in. And we want to remind ourselves about those very important and significant issues. Sometimes, we think when we take part in counseling or therapy or workshops and seminars, we think that we're going to go in there and hear something we've never heard before. Well, it's often not the case. The power in such learning and development experiences is that oftentimes it's very much what you know, but you maybe need a reminder or a reinforcer of some of the points that you need to think about again. And hopefully afterwards you feel a little bit more refreshed and you're able to return back to your life with a fresher perspective and of course take that fresh perspective and apply it to the area in your life which you think may require some attention. Now, of course, knowledge is power in many ways, but knowledge without action is not very powerful. So I really do invite you to think about some of the things that we discuss here together, but also to think about how can I make these points or these bits of advice actionable? How can I apply them to my life and perhaps alter some of the bad habits that have formed throughout the years, or that maybe I would like to introduce and incorporate new habits into my life. So do think about that. Take down some points, and you may have some questions associated to how you can transform some of these topics into more actionable steps. So do ask those questions if you need to. So what we want to do is then take a holistic approach about this topic of leading myself. There's all this information about effective leadership and effective management, and lots of information about looking at what that looks like to improve not only employee performance and well-being, but also the health of the organization. But it really needs to start with you. And before we can lead anybody else, whether it's in our family, in our relationships, or again within our place of work, if we're not leading ourselves, then it won't be very effective for us to try and lead others. So we do need to take a holistic approach and consider the past, the present, and in the future to see how these different dimensions have contributed to perhaps a loss of control or predictability in our lives. So to start with, what defines us? If you look at your life, what defines you is your perception about life. So models of reality is one aspect of it. And the other aspect of it is how you take those models of reality or those points of perception and live your life. So if I give you an example, people who say, oh, I'm not really a morning person, and I don't have a very good morning routine, I don't get up in a good mood, and I often feel quite depleted and without energy by the time I get to work. And so that person's perception of the morning and the perception of themselves actually impacts the way that they conduct their morning rituals and the way that they feel by the time they get to work. You see, so it very much impacts how we feel, how we interact with others, how we communicate. And sometimes those models of reality that we have defined for ourselves need to be rechecked and revised. You see, we have to be the masters of those models of reality. We can't be managed by those models that we've created for ourselves. So there's lots of room and growth, and there's lots of room and development to be able to alter, to revisit, and to revise those perceptions that have been formed through years of programming, and as a result, habits that have formed through those years of programming that may no longer be benefiting us or doing us a favor, if you will, or creating a situation where we're living functionally. So if we look at the past, for example, we're talking a lot about this issue of programming. And if you look at the past, you see at different ages, different stages of our life, we create a blueprint of what our life should look like. Okay, and we've got this idea in our mind that by the age of 22, I should have graduated from college. By 26, 27, I should have been married. By 32, I should have 3 kids, and by 37, I should land this job and be making X amount of salary. But unfortunately, what happens is when we create this blueprint in our mind, we often do it partly unconsciously and partly consciously. And the issue here is that sometimes it does limit us and it can oppress us, because if life doesn't turn out to be exactly as we had planned it to be, and if things don't happen in the way that we had planned them to happen, we feel quite disappointed and we feel quite let down and demotivated at times. And we may not even realize the fact that if I'm not married by the age of 27, let's say, and if somewhere along my mind I had planned that that was the right age of marriage, unfortunately what might happen is I try and fit life into my blueprint rather than look at my blueprint once again and revise and update it. So in order to lead yourself, one of the most important things we need to do is dig up that blueprint that we had created for ourselves. When was the last time it was designed? Which aspects of it are still relevant? What is no longer relevant? And that we really need to work on revising it. And if we don't, what happens is that we become sort of imprisoned by the blueprint, and it no longer works as a document to guide us and guide our goals and aspirations, but what actually happens is that it holds us back, and we feel that we're not able to set new plans and have new aspirations because we may be demotivated as a result. Coming into the present, there's a few questions that I want you to ask yourself. So oftentimes in our personal and professional development settings, what we do is we ask questions. And remember, this is a tool for you. These kinds of experiences, they should be tools to guide you. You are whole, you're resourceful, and you're creative. You've got all the answers. What we need to do, professionals such as myself, is to guide you in the right direction to be able to come up with solutions for yourself when you hit, the bumps along the road or the challenges that you might experience. So what I want you to do is, looking at the present over here, I want you to rank yourself from 1 to 5 for the following questions. And some of these points over here, I'm just trying to move this out of the way. So some of the questions over there, I'm just going to read them so that we can go one by one, and for you to have a piece of paper and rank yourself from 1 to 5 on the following questions. So to begin with, how satisfied do I feel about my career or daily activities and responsibilities? Do I have a sense of purpose? And sense of purpose means when you wake up in the morning, are you excited and happy about the kinds of work that you're doing? Do you understand the importance and the impact of the work that you're doing? Or do you just see it as something to pay the bills? Do I have a healthy sense of awareness about myself and others? Do I set goals and work towards achieving them? Am I resilient? And by resilient, for those of you who may not be sure exactly what that means, it's when you're resilient, you're able to bounce back from adversities. When you have hit a bump in the road or you experience some challenges, you fall to the ground perhaps, but you dust yourself up, you stand back up again and start again. You don't let life knock you down. And then we have, so with these questions over here, do I adapt and change when needed, or just accept status quo? Do I seek opportunities for learning? So rank yourself from 1 to 5. Do I have a healthy social life? Do I feel content in my relationship? And of course, you know, when you think about this, everyone has arguments, everyone has ups and downs in the relationship, but by and large, do you have a sense of security, trust, commitment, and are you life partners in your relationship? Do I take care of my physical health? Am I able to handle my negative thoughts effectively? Do I reflect on all that I have to be grateful for? So not only think about what I don't have and all the problems in my life, but how often do I am I thankful for everything that I do have? Am I able to self-affirm my plans without needing the approval of others? See, there are people who unfortunately are more driven by the expectations of others rather than design their life and lead themselves based on their skills and competencies and their purpose and passions in life. But there are those who are constantly seeking the approvals of others, which usually ends up letting them feel deflated and disappointed again. So what I ask from you here in the present is, what do you want? You see, sure, we're alive and we're surviving, but thrive is one of the most beautiful words in the English language. And what thrive refers to is when you're conscious about some of the questions that we just asked one another, and I asked you to rank yourself on those questions, is to really have a holistic view of these different dimensions. And for you to look at some of the areas in which you scored a little bit lower than the other ones. So the ones that you gave yourself a 2, you know, maybe a 1 on, and think about, what do I need to do to lift that number so that I'm thriving, so that I'm progressing positively and I'm progressing powerfully, not just living or surviving. You see, our beliefs shape the reality around us. As I mentioned to you, there are two things, two of the greatest spheres about our life is, first of all, the beliefs around us, as well as the way that we conduct or apply those beliefs to live our lives. And when you engage in experiences such as the one that you're in right now, such as this webinar, or any kind of learning and development activity, you start to question those beliefs, and you don't let them guide you, or you're not a puppet to them any longer. You learn to evaluate and explore what works for you, what's relevant, and those that perhaps need to be abandoned and left behind. MIT recently looked at research on the sense of fulfillment and what makes people happy in regards to work as well as their private life. And after years and years of longitudinal research, they found that the most successful individuals talked about 3 points that really helped and contributed to their well-being. And that was purpose, to begin with. So when they woke up in the morning, they had a sense, a purpose, a drive about who they are and who they want to be and how they want to make a difference. They felt self-directed. That means they had a certain amount of predictability and controllability about their life. They didn't feel as if their life was being written for them. They were the author and the driver of their life. And finally, the point of mastery, which means when they are engaged in a particular task or hobby or profession, that they go really deep into it, that they don't just skim the surface of opportunity, that they really master themselves in that discipline or in that particular role. And the deeper they get into it and the more specialized they become with that understanding, the more fulfilled they feel as a result. So, moving forward into the future, what we want to leave behind as you're leading yourself is a few points. Let's start with seeking approval. See, it's very, very important for us to keep our family and our individuals, our collective group, significant collective group around us. Of course, we have to consider them, but at the same time, that kind of approval should come internally from yourself rather than seeking it always from external sources. I also want you to acknowledge the fact that, stay away from cliches and platitudes or these secret formulas to happiness. The self-help industry is massively booming, and it's, there's so many books that are written every year, and it is probably going to, self-help books today outsell even biographies, which makes us a bit nervous. And that means that people are multiple buyers of these self-help books because oftentimes they're acting less on the advice that is given to them, and they're seeking these secret formulas to happiness and well-being, and really there is none. It's very much tailor-made and unique to each person, and therefore this generalized one-size-fits-all formula, it really is not effective. At the same time, we need to be positive, but ceaseless optimism isn't correct or effective either. That means we need to have a more middle ground perception about our life and our plans and goals. Doesn't mean we have to be negative, but doesn't mean we have to be ceaselessly optimistic either. We've got to be quite realistic to strike a balance between the two. And finally, visualization by itself is not going to get us anywhere. So we pass through an era of law of attraction and such ideologies, and of course visualizing your goal in the planning process is powerful and it can be effective, but in the long run, when we want to realize our goals and make it happen, we need the law of action more than the law of attraction. So very important to make sure that our plans are actionable and able to put it into practice. So as a way to conclude our discussion here, our very short discussion, just to get your minds thinking about some of these points, is I want you to think about making two practical commitments as to what actions are you going to take to raise the lower rankings of some of the questions that I asked you. And therefore, if you, for example, scored lower on the point about I take care of my physical health, and then think about two practical commitments you would do to try and raise that. Now, the difference between practical commitments and practical or philosophical statements is if I scored low on my taking care of my health and well-being, if I really want to make a commitment, I would say I would make an appointment with a dietitian or a nutrition doctor, and I would try and go see them next week and follow their advice and start going to the gym or going for a jog at least 3 times a week. See, these are practical commitments. Saying things like, okay, well, I'll try to exercise more or I'll try to eat healthier, they're more sort of philosophical promises. So make sure the commitments you make are actionable and practical. Okay? And finally, I really want to thank you for seeking out this opportunity. And it is your desire to want to learn more and to live more. And I hope that you are as thrilled as I am about the whole learning and development process, because we never stop learning and we never stop developing. And I really welcome the opportunity always to learn from other people. I learn from my clients as I hope to impart some learning to them. And it really is an inspiring and powerful process. So I really hope that we get to meet again in whatever platform possible, whether it's online or otherwise. So thank you very much for this opportunity.